Okay, let's get started here, and if you could, we're going to talk this week, surprisingly again, about that Jerusalem-Israel thing. Again, we talk each week about the convergence of events, and one of the most significant ones that we've had here in the recent memory has been this alignment of the nations with regard to Israel. And we remind you of Zechariah chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens and layeth the foundation of the earth, and formeth the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. There are many other verses in Joel that talks about the fact that in the end times they will try to divide the land. They will divide the land of Israel. And this is what the world has been talking about. So let's talk about a few other things before we get into the thing. Just sort of some interesting things that show that we live at a time of immense and rapid change. Things change very, very quickly. Now, I'm not a fan of these, but I think this is interesting how this happens. Do you know that right now that the world banana crop is at risk? There is a fungus that started in Southeast Asia, moved into the Middle East. It has yet to move into South and Central America, where the bulk of the banana crop comes. And most of the bananas that you see in the store today are the Cavendish banana. That replaced another banana about 60 years ago that was lost due to a fungus also. I don't even remember the name of that. It begins with a G. And it's just interesting how quickly this happens, and it could wipe out all the banana crop in the world. And the banana there are more bananas sold, consumed in the United States than apples and oranges combined. I didn't know that. And people, everybody wants the nice big bunch of bananas that are nice and yellow, look a certain way. And there are some alternatives, but they're kind of fatter. They don't have that nice curve that everybody likes to get. And the problem with the bananas, the Cavendish, is they don't produce seeds. So they're all just clones of like one banana. They're trying to do some genetically modified things, but they're afraid that people in America and Europe who are concerned about genetically modified foods won't eat those. And it's an important food. It's billions of dollars a year. I think the banana crop imported in the United States each year is $3 billion or something like that. So that old phrase, sir, we have no bananas, may actually come true. Now, as I said, I'm not a big banana fan. This is something that we see more and more. This was an event that took place at a church in England, in the United Kingdom, Milad, Advent, and Christmas celebration, marking the birthday of Prophet Muhammad and looking forward to the birthday of Jesus. A combined event at a church, and it's this interfaith thing. And I think you're going to see more and more of these things happen. This was an interesting article that has geopolitical implications. The big crack up, and you see there, Newsweek had a cover with the world drying up and cracking, a dry place in hell. And the subject of the article is the nation of Jordan. And the subtitle of the article is that Jordan could be the first country to officially run out of water on the planet. Water, as you may know, is relatively important to life. When we were in Israel, the person, Joel Kramer, who took us around for a few days, was living at the time in Amman, Jordan. And he liked Israel because he can take a longer shower. In Jordan, they have an apartment. They live in Amman, a city of couple million people, and it's very densely populated. I'd been there. And he said, at the beginning of the month, the water company fills our cistern, and if we run out 20 days into the month, we have no water in our home for 10 days or 11 days. So we have to ration the water and make sure we don't use too much. And that's true all over Amman, and that's just the way it is. I mean, it's a desert. They live in a desert, and they need water. So it's a major problem, and it's becoming an increasing problem in many other places around the world. There's some talk of trying to do some things at the Red Sea down to the Dead Sea and do some desalinization things. Israel's fortunate because they have that large gas deposit, and they can use that as a power source to do large amounts of desalinization, which takes some power to force the water through the filters that they need to force it through. So just keep an eye on that, because as if there wasn't enough other things going on, you have to add this on top of it. Now, I'm going to talk about this for just a moment. This is a ministry called ChristAlignment.org. It is a ministry in Melbourne, Australia. It appears to me to be affiliated in some way with Bethel Church in Redding, California. And I've warned many times about Bethel Church, and I think anything that I say that generates a lot of hate mail, that I just don't understand Bethel and that sort of thing. Now listen, folks, I understand Bethel. I know what Bethel teaches. I have studied it. I have watched their stuff. This is a false apostate church. I don't care if they mention Jesus occasionally or anything else. It wraps up all sorts of New Age mysticism, false signs and wonders, all into a nice package. And people need to be careful with that. Their music group, Jesus Culture, is very popular. They're going to be at the IHOP thing in Kansas City this week. The One Thing conference that Mike Bickle's International House of Prayer in the Kansas City area puts on, I think Jesus Culture is there. I can't remember the other. I know one of the speakers is Francis Chan. Will be there for about the third time, and this is very problematic in my opinion. But I want you to listen to this, and I'll explain a little bit. This is what they put on their website, and some of their website has been taken down. But there's this great thing out there called archive.org, and if you can get the URL, you can go and find out what used to be on their website. And some of these things were, for example, they went to a big transgender festival, and they had pictures of them with these drag queens and everything, talking about how they were ministering to them. And I understand that they are, but I want you to understand the orientation of these. It says here, email for accurate personal destiny reading bookings, dream interpretation, spiritual cleansing, relationship counseling, or healing. And how do they do that? Our cards, they say, lead the way. They've developed these destiny cards. Quote, you can't come into destiny until you take responsibility for your own life. The Christ Alignment team use at least 5 different types of cards in destiny readings. These are not necessary for an intuitive reader, as we are all hearing from the third heaven realm, but greatly enhance the reading. We believe that they are more predictive and higher than most cards, and can address a current life question that you may have. Card readings with Christ alignment are always followed by the reader taking the client into an encounter in the highest realm. Often color is seen, and it is in this realm that answers come for poignant questions that clients have and lives are changed. And the one thing that I noticed, there were all kinds of pictures of what they do at the readings and the cards that they use. And what do they look like? I mean, they look like tarot cards, right? And palm readings, that's correct. We call our artists prophetic. That means that as intuitive readers themselves, an artist, and I want you to understand, I'm merely quoting from what they say. I'm not enhancing it. We call our artists prophetic. That means as intuitive readers themselves and artists able to connect with spirit, their artwork carries meaning and power to change lives. Each painting has been done through connection to the third heaven realm. Unfortunately, our unique destiny cards are not for sale, as all images are copywritten, and we prefer to keep them for use within the team. And here are some of the ones they have. They have color card readings, they have animal card readings, they have psalm card readings, and destiny readings. Look what it says under psalm cards. Psalm readings are similar to other card readings where cards are counted out according to your birth date and year. Only 3 cards are used, and these will possibly represent your past, present, and future. By the way, I looked through a bunch of pages of their website. This was the only place where I found something that might be related to Scripture, psalm cards. There's no Scripture quoted anywhere, which is one of the problems I have with Bethel. They get up there and talk like they're giving us new Scripture. Destiny readings, our unique destiny cards, which we have developed, are so accurate that even if your life circumstances change dramatically on your return to do them again years later, you will find the results identical, such as their accuracy. They are able to give profound insight into relationships, career, and spiritual life. And somebody, I said this, I saw, I think it was on Lighthouse Trails this week, a pastor at a pastor's wife at a church within what you would call it an evangelical denomination or fellowship was recommending the Enneagram. We've talked about the Enneagram. This is a New Age thing that's been recast as something that might be Christian. It's actually not New Age, it's actually Old Age, but it's just false mysticism, and they've recast it. Now, what happened originally was that, everybody said, this is Bethel Church, and so Chris Van Latten got on his Facebook page. He's a pastor, one of the pastors there at Bethel, and he said, no, we don't support this. He said this, someone told me that there is an article stating that some Christians are now using Christian tarot cards, apparently called destiny cards, and that some people associated with Bethel were doing so. This is insane, he says. First of all, whoever is doing this needs to repent and stop the craziness in the name of reaching people for Christ. And then it goes on to talk about how great Bethel is. At the end, he says, loving people creatively is exciting, but we need wisdom as we move into the cesspool called the world. Please stop the craziness. That was what he said. I can't remember the date, but that post no longer exists on Facebook. It's been taken down. And then he put this up a couple days later. Let's be clear, I was speaking against tarot cards and their use, which I'm still against. I was addressing people who are accusing Bethel taking part in this practice. We don't and never have been part of this, so that's still true. The people who were named in the article were never named in the people's accusations of us. The article turned out to be fake news against great people who love God, don't use tarot cards, and lead thousands of people who do to Christ. So yes, I retract any implication I made against them for obvious reasons. So he flopped, right? Another post later in the thread there, he says, it might also be important to remember that Daniel was numbered among the sorcerers. Actually, he was the chief of them all, yet he was not a sorcerer at all. So this is what Bethel does. They twist things like this, and you need to avoid them. Look, I know people whose families have been broken up by Bethel. Their children will have nothing to do with them. That's not godly. And it's because of what it's crazy. So let's turn to politics, geopolitics in the Middle East. Now, President Trump came out this week with the new national security strategy. I looked through it. It has a number of component parts, and here are the major pillars, the 4 pillars: protect the American people, the homeland, and the American way of life, promote American prosperity, preserve peace through strength, advance American influence. Here's a little more readable thing. So those are the goals, those are the pillars. Now, I will give this credit. The president gave a speech. It came out on Monday, and he gave a speech or two about it this week. I recommend that you go and listen to those. I will give this credit, is that I looked through it and I counted up, jihadist terrorist is actually mentioned 24 times. This did not happen under the prior administration. So I'm sure heads are exploding all over the State Department and other places. By the way, I hear that there's a whole bunch of people that work at the EPA that are upset with Scott Pruitt and they're leaving. And, so I hope they find a job someplace, what's to say, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Now, there are some things in there. I'll talk later about them, about infrastructure. But this week, let's focus on the whole Jerusalem and Israel thing that went on. That's what we'll cover most of the time today. Prior to last week, before I talked, this article appeared, and I must confess I missed it. It was in the Wall Street, it was in the Washington Post, it was on CBS News, that people in the White House had said that they expect the Western Wall to be part of Israel. Here's what the exact quote was. We cannot envision now this is an unnamed person, we cannot envision any situation under which the Western Wall would not be a part of Israel. But as the president said, the specific boundaries of sovereignty of Israel are going to be part of the final status agreement. We note that we cannot imagine Israel would sign a peace agreement that didn't include the Western Wall. And that's great. And so exactly what that means and how that plays out is interesting. It's also interesting this week that what came out was the dedication, or what happened was the dedication of a new synagogue, a shul, at the Western Wall, in the Western Wall tunnels. And if you've been there, you go to the Western Wall and you can go down this passageway into these tunnels. And in there are these prayer rooms and reading rooms and like libraries. Well, beyond those, so the Western Wall, I don't have a graphic to show you. The Western Wall kind of covers the southwest portion of the Temple Mount area. And by the way, before anybody says anything, I know that there are other theories out there, another theory or two about, there are a bunch of theories about where the temple is going to be located. Currently, one of the hot ones, the popular ones, is that it won't be built on the Temple Mount anyway, that it exists 200 meters south of the current Temple Mount, above the northern edge of the old city of David, and near the what they call the Gaian Spring. And that's a theory, and Bob Cornuke and some other people are promoting it. I personally don't agree with it because the water aqueducts went to the Temple Mount, the existing, what we call the Temple Mount, which was expanded by Herod. It wasn't the same size when Solomon was there. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for it. I don't want to get into the arguments for and against right now. I will just note that you could probably count the Jewish rabbis in Israel that believe that it would be in the city of David on this hand and have fingers left over. They just don't believe it. And they're the ones who are going to want to build the temple anyway. So I think you need to talk about them. But this synagogue is kind of significant because it's even closer to the area up above where they think that the temple stood and the Holy of Holies and all that. This is actually the closest that the Jews could get to pray. And remember, in 1948, when Israel declared independence, they had a war. And as a result of that war, the Jews were kicked out of the old city of Jerusalem. And they lost the ability to go to the Temple Mount. In fact, it was used as a dump by the Jordanians. So anytime you hear, the Arab side saying, "Oh, we respect other people's rights to worship," it's there's a term for that, And I think you know what that term is. It's the nice way of saying it is it's just baloney. It's nonsense because they never do. They desecrate these sites and they use tombstones, Jewish tombstones for latrines and urinals. So, but this one is significant in that, and this has a kind of a spherical Torah arc there, and this is about as close as you can get for the Jews to pray near the Holy of Holies right now. And I think this is a pretty big deal. So we know that Trump came out, he made the announcement, everybody got upset about it, and then there were all these headlines that, okay, first thing that's going to happen is the UN Security Council is going to vote to void Trump's Jerusalem dedication or declaration. And so they did. And here's a picture of the vote, voting for a resolution to, there's 15 members of the Security Council. There are five permanent members, one of which is the United States. And so you can see them here in this picture. Hang on here. You can see the members here all voting. 14 of them, they all have their hands up, except over here, here's Danny Danon, and here's Nikki Haley. And this is to vote in support of the resolution.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2017/1060 please raise their hand? Thank you. Will those against? Thank you.
14-1.
No abstentions. The result of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 1 vote against. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council.
And so Nikki Haley vetoed it. And personally, I think in a year of, people being, I was looking through some pictures of the year. And one of the pictures of the year was the inauguration of Donald Trump. Right next to it, I think it was in the New York Times that had it today, and sort of one of their year-end summaries, was a picture of all the pink hat feminist protests. So in a year that started like that, I think ending with the iconic picture of Nikki Haley as the ambassador of the United States to the United Nations, vetoing it, standing up effectively against the entire world, I think is a great picture. I love that picture. And it should be seared in your mind, as should what her comments were when she spoke about her vote.
This is the first time I have exercised the American right to veto a resolution in the Security Council. The exercise of the veto is not something the United States does often. We have not done it in more than 6 years. We do it with no joy, but we do it with no reluctance. The fact that this veto is being done in defense of American sovereignty and in defense of America's role in the Middle East peace process is not a source of embarrassment for us. It should be an embarrassment to the remainder of the Security Council. As I pointed out when we discussed this topic 10 days ago, I will once again note the features of the President's announcement on Jerusalem that are most relevant here. The President took great care not to prejudge final status negotiations in any way, including the specific boundaries of Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem. That remains a subject to be negotiated only by the parties. The position is fully in line with the previous Security Council resolutions. The President was also careful to state that we support the status quo regarding Jerusalem's holy sites, and we support a two-state solution if that's what the parties agree to. What we witnessed here today in the Security Council is an insult. It won't be forgotten. It's one more example of the United Nations doing more harm than good in addressing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Today, for the simple act of deciding where to put our embassy, the United States was forced to defend its sovereignty. The record will reflect that we did so proudly. Today, for acknowledging a basic truth about the capital city of Israel, we are accused of harming peace. The record will reflect that we reject that outrageous claim. For these reasons, and with the best interests of both the Israeli and the Palestinian people firmly in mind, the United States votes no on this resolution.
Now, you need to remember that, again, the timing of everything is very significant. And I like Nikki Haley. I like what she's doing. I like the stance that she's taking. It was 1 year ago, almost to the day, 1 year ago, that we had a UN Security Council vote on Resolution 2334. And that resolution, essentially, it was another one of the, it's hard to keep them straight after a while because there are so many UN resolutions against Israel. But you remember, I played for you, that following Sunday, I played for you the speech that Samantha Power gave against that, or refusing to exercise the United States veto when it came to Israel for the first time. First time. And it was that vote that the special counsel is now after Jared Kushner and some other people because they tried to get people to vote against it, and supposedly that's a violation of the Logan Act, and this is just absolute nonsense. They were trying to prevent damage from being done, and I'll be surprised if anybody's prosecuted for it, but everybody out there on the left is, oh, this is impeachment, they're going to impeach Trump, this is collusion, he's interfering in our foreign policy, as if American citizens aren't allowed to have opinions and talk to other people about them. That's why I'm not sure if anybody's been prosecuted under the Logan Act in like 200 years, because we do believe in something called free speech. Well, there was some reaction, and so you remember the iconic picture of Samantha Power capitulating to all the other people in the world in a decidedly biased, anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist, anti-Israel resolution at the UN. And every other nation of the world was against the UN. And then for the first time, it appeared that the US abstained, so we didn't veto that, so the thing passed. And you remember there was this push, we're going to get peace, and Kerry was running all over the place, and Obama, came out against Netanyahu pretty strongly. Here's Prime Minister Netanyahu's response to the U.S. vote at the UN Security Council.
Thank you, Ambassador Haley. On Hanukkah, you spoke like a Maccabee. You lit a candle of truth. You dispelled the darkness. One defeated the many. Truth defeated lies. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you, Nikki Haley.
And that was it. I like his speeches sometimes. They're very short and to the point, as opposed to some other presidents we've had in the recent past who seem to drone on for quite a while. And never take a glass of water. I don't understand how you can, it's otherworldly how that you can speak that long and not take a drink. So then all these reports, all these news, the front page of every paper, I could put up page after page after page of all the images of the front pages of these newspapers all over the world talking about this. Jerusalem Post, the Abbas is going to, the Palestinian Authority is going to seek UN membership. Outlines plan to join over 500 international organizations in response to Trump's Jerusalem declaration. Erdogan came out. I'll talk a little bit about him later. Defied Trump, said, we have our own plans. We're going to put our own embassy in East Jerusalem. Now listen, Israel's not going to let Erdogan put his embassy in East Jerusalem. It's just not going to happen. But what is Erdogan doing? Erdogan really wants to become the new caliph of the new caliphate, the revived Ottoman Empire. He has been pushing this for some time. And he's going to play to the Arab street. And he does this in all of his speeches. And what you don't hear in the media a lot is what he actually says. And we'll talk about that near the end because it kind of plays into another subject. So Trump came out and he made some comments before an event at the White House. And he said, you know, look, maybe we're just going to stop giving aid to the people who don't vote with us on this. And we'll save a lot of money. It's up to them. And he just says, we'll save a lot, and that's great. And and he was very short and to the point. It's like, I should have played the clip of it. It's about, it's less than a minute long. You can easily find that. And so he said, and Nikki Haley followed this up. So what did the Palestinians do? Down here in the lower left-hand corner, abandoning hope in U.S. peace efforts, Palestinians turned to Russia. That's seems to be significant in a prophetic scheme of things. Here's that article. Now the Saudis kind of came out, and I'll talk, if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about the Saudis later. I'm probably not going to get to the Saudis, but everybody's all excited about, oh, the Saudis, they're doing this, they're doing that. And I'm just going to say don't get too excited about the Saudis. Watch them because they have this tendency to, what's the old saying? Shake their hand and then count your fingers afterwards. And Dr. Kadar has a great article at the Begin Sadat Center. If I don't have time to get it, go to Begin Sadat Center and read his paper about 10 rules for negotiating with the Saudis. And it's pretty good. If I have time, I'll get to that. Well, and then other people were running around. So here is King Abdullah of Jordan. Of course, he runs off to the Vatican, and the Pope has some comments to make about how terrible the U.S. is, and King Abdullah says this is going to affect peace. Then the report came out that 176 nations were going to call for Palestinian statehood. And so everybody was all upset. At the meantime, Jason Greenblatt arrived in Israel for his first major diplomatic test. At the same time this is going on, you saw this article in Haaretz, and it's kind of interesting. Haaretz is a very left-wing paper. But every now and then they have a reality check. And so down here you see the Palestinian Santa in the center using a slingshot to throw rocks at Israeli soldiers. And then looming Syrian attack on rebels challenges Syria. And what's happening is that Syria is kind of reasserting control over areas close to the Golan Heights. And because of Hezbollah and Iran making this path all the way from Iran to the Mediterranean, everybody's in Israel is very concerned about this. What are we going to do? Because they have a lot of rockets. Caroline Glick has a very good article talking about how the international community and the liberal media have played into this. And one of the things that she talks about there was a great article in Politico about a thing called Project Cassandra, which was an investigation that was being done in the Department of Justice and the FBI about Hezbollah being involved in the drug trade in the United States, mainly in the area of cocaine. Well, what happened was the Obama administration wanted to get this agreement with Iran. Well, because Iran is the big supporter of Hezbollah, having Hezbollah all over the papers as a major drug importer and people being indicted and banks being sued by the United States and that sort of thing, that would have not played very well for Obama's goal, which was to give all that money back, $150 billion or what it was, back to Iran. So the Department of Justice, or the Obama administration, squelched that investigation. There is a phenomenal article, Politico, which is a left-leaning publication, by the way, about what happened. And Jeff Sessions has come out and said, we're going to investigate what happened. We're gonna look into it. Now, these investigations take quite a while, so don't expect anything to happen overnight. But to show you the kind of people that we were dealing with in the Obama administration, one of the architects of the Iran deal was Ben Rhodes. And Ben Rhodes bragged, remember he had that article in the New York Times bragging about how, man, I was able to pull the wool over the media's eyes, I was able to fool them. Well, he tweeted this week in response, look at the tweet below. Somebody tweeted, I hope this is the photo they use on the front page of the Times on the day that Trump is indicted. And it's a picture of McConnell and Ryan and Pence and Trump, talking about the tax deal that was passed and the signing of the tax deal. And Ben Rhodes tweeted, and alongside the obits for Ryan, McConnell, and Pence. That's the kind of person that we're dealing with. There were all kinds of protests in the Palestinian. Go read Caroline Glick's article, Wednesday in Jerusalem Post, or carolineglick.com, you can find it. There was this, and I apologize for not having the video of this, this 16-year-old girl, there was a dispute in one of the Palestinian areas. They were throwing rocks and stuff at the Israeli soldiers. And, Pam and I, we had a number of encounters since we were going through parts of Judea and Samaria. We had to go through checkpoints a number of times. And these soldiers, they're kids. I mean, they're 19, 20, 21 years old. And they're attacked, and they're subject to being stabbed and all this other stuff. And so this girl and her family, this 16-year-old girl, she went up and slapped a soldier. They call her, they've sort of nicknamed her in the social media Shirley Temper. And she was arrested last night, by the way. I had a video of that. I didn't have time to put into my presentation. So she's been arrested, but this is what these soldiers put up with all the time. And you see, like, this is the tires. Well, this is in Kurdistan, but you see them, these are tires that are being burned in the street. Even a Saudi academic came out this week, a guy named Abdullah Hakim, head of the Middle East Center for Strategic and Legal Studies in Jeddah, told US-based Al Hurra television on Saturday that Trump's move constitutes a positive shock to the peace process. We as Arabs must, he said, we as Arabs must come to an understanding with the other party and know what its demands are so that we can succeed in peace negotiation efforts, so that negotiations be not futile. We must recognize and realize that Jerusalem is a religious symbol to Jews and sacred to them as Mecca and Medina are to Muslims. And you're going to, I think from the Saudi side, you're going to hear these people come out and say these things because it's part of the negotiating strategy. When they are weak, they negotiate. And Saudi Arabia is weak right now. They have some economic issues that they have to deal with. So after the U.S. veto, then the UN Jerusalem was going to meet on Thursday to consider a resolution about the status of Jerusalem. And it says this, expressing in this our deep regret at recent decisions concerning the status of Jerusalem. And paragraph 2, demands that all states comply with Security Council resolutions regarding the holy city of Jerusalem and not recognize any actions or measures contrary to those resolutions. And then reiterates its call for the reversal of the negative trends on the ground that are imperiling the two-state solution and for the intensification and acceleration of international and regional efforts and support aimed at achieving without delay a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East on the basis of the relevant United Nations resolutions, the Madrid terms of reference, including the principle of land for peace, the Arab Peace Initiative, and the Quartet Roadmap, and an end to the Israeli occupation that began in 1967. And so on Thursday, the UN General Assembly met, and they had a vote on
We shall now begin the
resolution.
voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/ES-10/L22, please signify.
The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
And there's the 128 in favor, 9 against, 35 abstentions. And of course, everybody was all excited there If you want to look for some good news in the way that people voted, there were about 20 countries that didn't vote at all. There were 35 abstentions, which you could consider to be a no vote. There were actually 9 that voted against this. The United States and our powerful allies in the South Pacific, mostly, and Guatemala and Honduras. Palau, Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Togo, I'm not even sure, Nauru. I mean, I don't even know where some of these places are. Honduras, Guatemala. And you see people voting against this, like the United Kingdom. Canada did abstain. I think Australia abstained. Now, so if you want something positive, I think the Palestinians thought they were going to go in there and they're going to get near unanimous vote. There'd be 9 people against, everybody would vote in their favor. But so we know 35 abstained, 20 didn't vote, that's 55, 9 against, that's 64. And then you have 128 in favor. And if you back out the Organization of Islamic Cooperation States, which are 53 or 57, you know, so really it was like 71 to 64, you could say, you could argue that. So it's not as bad as you think, but it's clear that the world really does stand against Jerusalem. And you see these, you know, the images of these vote, and it was all over the place. I mean, headlines everywhere, UN rebukes, everybody, Trump defied. From the Arab newspapers, the world backs Palestine over the status of Jerusalem. U.S. isolated by unified UN vote on Jerusalem. World slaps Trump over Jerusalem. Striking rebuke. UN rejects Trump. UN denounces Jerusalem edict rebuffing Trump. That's the New York Times there on the right. So everybody was against it. Here is Danny Danon before the vote. This is what he had to say.
It is shameful for the United Nations that I must stand before you today. It is shameful that this meeting is even taking place. Jerusalem is the holiest place on earth for the Jewish people. It is the capital of the state of Israel. Period. It is a fact that simply cannot be disputed. King David declared Jerusalem the city of the Jewish people 3,000 years ago. The Jewish Bible mentions Jerusalem 660 times. Our prayers recall Jerusalem's holy name over and over again. As our Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, said, and I quote, "Jerusalem is an inseparable part of the history of Israel, of the faith of Israel."
And then he went on to use the little thing with the coin, the 67 AD coin that he had done before. Nikki Haley also spoke just before Danny Danon, and she was, I have to say, I like her, what she says. Here's a little bit of what she had to say.
To its shame, the United Nations has long been a hostile place for the state of Israel. Both the current and the previous Secretary Generals have objected to the UN's disproportionate focus on Israel. It's a wrong that undermines the credibility of this institution, and that in turn is harmful for the entire world. I've often wondered why, in the face of such hostility, Israel has chosen to remain a member of this body. And then I remember that Israel has chosen to remain in this institution because it's important to stand up for yourself. Standing here today, being forced to defend sovereignty and the integrity of my country, the United States of America, many of the same thoughts have come to mind. The United States is by far the single largest contributor to the United Nations and its agencies. The decision does nothing to harm peace efforts. Rather, the President's decision reflects the will of the American people and our right as a nation to choose the location of our embassy. There is no need to describe it further. Instead, there is a larger point to make. The United States will remember this day in which it was singled out for attack in the General Assembly for the very act of exercising our right as a sovereign nation. We will remember it when we are called upon to once again make the world's largest contribution to the United Nations. And we will remember it when so many countries come calling on us, as they so often do, to pay even more and to use our influence for their benefit. America will put our embassy in Jerusalem. That is what the American people want us to do, and it is the right thing to do. No vote in the United Nations will make any difference on that. But this vote will make a difference on how Americans look at the UN and on how we look at countries who disrespect us in the UN. And this vote will be remembered.
Okay, I think she means it. The Wall Street Journal had a good article about that. Again, here's the breakdown of the vote. I already went through that. Here's some of the history. I got this from UN Watch. In its history, the United Nations General Assembly has issued 97 resolutions condemning countries. 83 of those have been against Israel. 14 against all the countries in the rest of the world. In 2016, there were 26 resolutions, 20 of which were against Israel, 6 against the rest of the world. It's so interesting because the Bible over and over says that in the end times that Jerusalem will be a cup of trembling and people want to divide Israel and that type of thing. And what do you see happening in the world, especially since the UN came into existence around 1948 also? Its focus very often is on Israel. It's like they have this obsession with it. UNESCO usually just has resolutions about historical sites, but they've issued a number of resolutions condemning a country. And of those resolutions, 100% of those have been against Israel. The UN Human Rights Council has adopted 135 condemnatory resolutions in its time, 68, over 50% of them being against Israel. It happens over and over and over again. And it's clear, even the South Africa, with all the political problems going on down there and the African National Congress and goodness, the things my friends send me from South Africa are just very disturbing. They even came in and said, well, we're going to downgrade our embassy. Because I guess we're so perfect and we have to, go against Israel. Well, Mahmoud Abbas, he wasn't to be deterred. He had to run away from the vote at the UN, so he went to see Emmanuel Macron and was welcomed at the Elysee Palace by Macron, and they each gave a joint statement there. Macron said this: there is no other solution than the two-state solution, and no two-state solution without an agreement by both sides on Jerusalem. I myself will visit Palestine and Israel in 2018 in order to continue our exchanges on the peace process. Deciding today to recognize Palestine, would that be efficient? I don't think so for the moment, because this would be a reaction to a unilateral decision, and I don't want to base any decision by France concerning such an important subject on the reaction on the American decision on Jerusalem. We would be making a grave mistake of internationalizing a situation which we did not manage to resolve on the ground. At the moment, France will assume its responsibilities together with its partners to advance in that direction. The French voted against the U.S. on that resolution. So Seth, I can't remember his last name now. He's writing in the Jerusalem Post. And he says there's 5 takeaways from this. Abbas says U.S. is no longer a partner in peace. Macron says stability in the region and security of Palestine are paramount. He supports the Fatah-Hamas reconciliation. He condemns Israel for expanding in the West Bank. and Palestine is fighting terrorism. Erdogan, I mentioned this earlier, he comes on and he says, you know, look, this is we're going to put our there, and he's playing to the Arab street. That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to build himself up in the Arab street. And it's interesting that on the front page of the Jerusalem Post one day this week was this picture of protests going on in a Palestinian area. This is just outside of Jerusalem. But Pam and I, when we were in Nablus, we saw the day after evidence of these tires being burned on the street and the dumpsters being put there. And we even saw some cars that had been burned the day before we got there. And the title of this, very interesting, is Masked Rage. So I will quote this verse, Psalm chapter 2. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh, and the Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, thou art my son, this day I have begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, and thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be now wise, therefore, O ye kings, be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, S-O-N, capital S-O-N, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. That's a great, great passage. And that theme continues on into the following psalm. You can read that later. So there were a lot of reactions to this. And so Al Jazeera came out with top 10 reasons to celebrate the UN vote on Jerusalem. So here's some of their reasoning. This vote is a resounding global declaration that Israel as a rogue state has no moral or political standing among the global community, that is a European settler colony shoved down the throat of the world community of nations in decades after its final fabrication, and billions of dollars wasted on propaganda. Do you think they're maybe a little bit against Israel, against Zion? 2, the vote is an equally compelling indication that the U.S., particularly under the Trump administration, is a bully state and a toothless tiger that roars much louder than it can bite. So they go on with this. Let's see. 3, a total of 128 countries declared null and void the imperial decree of the U.S. that Jerusalem is the capital of its favorite military base, with only 9 countries, all small and weak states, succumbing to U.S. threats and 35 countries abstaining. This means that the entirety of the world community, minus 9 financially and politically vulnerable states, have no reason whatsoever to be intimidated by the U.S. and Israel. 4, it exposed the diplomatic incompetence of Nikki Haley and her Israeli counterpart to frighten and intimidate like 2 bulldogs barking at the world community. 5, the vote exposed that the Palestinian cause is a towering global concern, not limited to Arab and Muslim countries. Isn't that interesting? When you consider that the Bible 2,500 years ago said that Jerusalem would be a cup of trembling. 6, that Trump's son-in-law, Kushner, and with him the entire cabal of fanatical Zionists financing the Israeli settler colony, have created the defining moment of the moral depravity of those who support Israel. They need to diagram their sentences before they write them. That every U.S. citizen and every Israeli settler colonialist must look themselves in the mirror and see if they can stay there for a few decent seconds. Okay. Yeah, I'm fine. 7, along with the initial Trumpian declaration that had sought to normalize the Zionist theft of Jerusalem, this UN defiance forever denies the U.S. any pretense to be a fair and just arbiter of peace and exposes it as just an imperial backer. 8, the miserable failure of Nikki Haley puts an end to the Oslo peace charade and with it the two-state delusion. So they say the two-state is a delusion. By declaring the UN a house of lies for this vote, the Israeli strongman Benjamin Netanyahu has dismissed the whole world as delusional, a clear evidence of psychological projection. 10, the deserving and just humiliation of the Trump administration at the UN also puts it blatantly at odds with the rising tide of pro-Palestinian consciousness in the U.S. itself. And some of those, those are true, and I'm a little concerned about that. Now, here's an interesting article. This is on the front page, Lebanon Daily Star, the other day. And we all know that one of the arguments made is Israel can't be a one state because there's so many Palestinians. They would be the majority. The Jewish people would lose, and they would have to flee to another place. So one of the arguments has been that there are somewhere around 500, 600,000 Palestinians in refugee camps in Lebanon. So Lebanon did a census. And Caroline Glick's book, The Israeli Solution, has some of these articles, or some of these assertions, that they've overcounted, they double counted, and that type of thing. So they did a census. And this is a Lebanon paper reporting that the census found that 174,422 refugees lived in Lebanon's 12 camps and gatherings, significantly fewer than the long-standing and widely used estimate of 450,000. Now, I've seen as high as 600,000. Pretty stunning. Foreign Policy had some good articles this week. Jerusalem, after 30 years of hope and failure, what's next for Israel-Palestine? You can find those at the Foreign Policy website. And then Palestine is a victim of the Iranian-Saudi war. And that's interesting because a year ago, the Foreign Policy had an article up about what does a Saudi-Iranian war look like? That was the question that the article asked. And the answer was, it looks like the world we live in right now because they're at war, and they have been for a long time. And they continue to be at war. They just fight through proxies. They get other people to do their fighting, like in Yemen, Hezbollah, and the different militias against the Syrian regime and everything. So they rarely put their people out there on the front lines. Iran doesn't want to because they had that long war with Israel. Iraq, I'm sorry, excuse me. Shin Bet chief has said the West Bank and Gaza will be highly unstable after the Trump declaration. That was just this morning in Jerusalem at a Knesset meeting, that it could last at least 6 months is what they said. I don't have time to go to this. This is an article about the Saudi-Iranian war. If you want some positive news, this is kind of interesting. Prime Minister Netanyahu this week, in addition to some of the other speeches he did, gave a speech at the Bible Contest for Adults, which was held in Jerusalem. And he had this to say. Now, while he was speaking, his speech is in Hebrew, but there were a lot of protesters there, protesting his sale of arms to other places. But listen to just a couple of the comments that he made, because I think these are interesting in context. I look at the title of the quiz, and it was called The Bible Contest for Adults, 70 Years for Israel, and I think about the wonderful story of the resurrection of our people, which is unparalleled in the world. We walk in the path of the Hebrews of the Bible. We write new and exciting chapters with our own hands. The voice of the Bible comes to us from a distance and continues to eternity, as we know the eternity of Israel will not lie. It is worthwhile to listen and honor the field's heroes, because today, exactly 100 years ago, two of the heroes of the espionage network, Nahum Balkin and Yosef Lishansky, were executed in Damascus. In the last days of their lives, they found comfort in the Bible, and the news of the liberation of Jerusalem by the forces of General Allenby reached the ears of the prison. Lashansky, his friend said, read Psalms that he remembered from his childhood. He also asked in his will, as Joseph did, to raise the remains of his body to the homeland, and indeed his request was fulfilled. The bones of Joseph and Naaman were returned to the land of Israel. We will remember forever those courageous freedom fighters who poured stones to realize Isaiah's prophecy, for I am the creator of a new heaven and a new earth. And for 70 years we have been a country under our feet, a piece of heaven above our heads, and they are ours as right as our Jerusalem, our land of Israel. It all starts with standing up for the right. It all starts with standing up for the truth, and the foundation of those in the Bible. One line connects the Cyrus Declaration, the Balfour Declaration, and the President Trump Declaration, and the message to all this is right and truth. The power that we derive is the power of the Bible. And of course, I warmly welcome the tenderness of Bible studies in recent years. He has one at his residence. I had the great privilege of renewing the study of the Bible at the Prime Minister's residence in the name of my father-in-law, Shmuel ben Arzi, who taught the Bible and was proud to have played a key role in the renewal of this Bible quiz. For adults, as it was in the early years of the state, adults learn Bible, young people learn the Bible, Bibles study Bible in the land of the Bible. Interesting. I don't know if it was this same group, but his son won a youth Bible quiz competition 2 or 3 years ago. We need to pray for people and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. I don't have time to go into this. Maybe next week. 10 tips. Dr. Mordecai Kadar at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies writes 10 tips for Israel when negotiating with Saudi Arabia and the Arab world. I'll just share 1 or 2 of those with you. Says it's of the utmost importance to recognize that the Saudis do not really want peace with Israel. 2, Israel's not going anywhere. And peace with Saudi Arabia must be entirely unencumbered by other issues, particularly a Palestinian one. And this was kind of interesting. I said I was going to do this, and I decided to do this. If the Saudis insist on addressing the Palestinian issue, Israel's response should be, if you truly wish to help the Palestinians, you can build cities and towns for them in Saudi Arabia. Israel will be only too pleased to share its experience in establishing new communities and developing local economies and infrastructure for the benefit of residents. And this was kind of interesting. Israel will recognize the House of Saud's regime in Mecca and Medina, which they're not the native tribe from that area, It's King Abdullah's family, the Hashemites, that were in charge of Mecca and Medina until the House of Saud took them over back in around 1930. Israel recognized House of Saud's regime in Mecca and Medina, their holy places, in exchange for Saudi recognition of Israel's right to Jerusalem as its historic and eternal capital city. We'll grant recognition to Saudi Arabia's self-definition as an Islamic state in exchange for Saudi recognition of Israel as a Jewish state or as a state belonging to the Jewish people. Israel will recognize the right of the House of Saud to live anywhere in Saudi Arabia in exchange for Saudi recognition of the Jewish people's inalienable right to live in all of Israel, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. Israel will not allow incitement against Saudi Arabia and its media. In return, the Saudis will not allow anti-Israel incitement in the Saudi media. This is crucial in regard to Al Jazeera in case Qatar joins the negotiations with Israel. Well, he goes on, he has 5 more reasons, and you can find those. You want me to cover them? Okay. It's the holidays. Nobody's going to the buffet today anyway, so. Anyway. Israel will permit its embassy in Saudi Arabia to be located wherever the Saudis wish it to be, provided the Saudis agree to locate their embassy in Israel wherever the Israelis wish it to be, that is, in Jerusalem. I like the way Dr. Kadar likes to negotiate. Saudi Arabia will not vote against Israel in international organizations and institutions, and Israel will not vote against the Saudis in those same venues. Both states will have the right to abstain from voting if they wish. 8, the Americans and Europeans must be kept away from the negotiating table as they are not party to the agreement and will not have to suffer the consequences of its failure. Israel must absolutely refrain from accepting international guarantees, even from the best friends, in exchange for giving in on something that the Saudis want. He used the example of the agreement of Russia, the UK, and the US about Ukraine. Well, how's that going? Right? I mean, did the US or UK step up when Russia took over the Crimean Peninsula? Peace with the Saudis must entail more than just a ceasefire with an attached document, salam in Arabic. Israel must instead insist on complete normalization, sul in Arabic, which includes cultural, tourist, business, industrial art, aeronautical, scientific, technological, athletic, and academic ties and exchanges. So that's his roadmap for peace. I want to cover one other thing, and I'll be brief on this. This week we had a non-terror attack in Melbourne. Another vehicle attack. They come out, they said it's not terror. So you can judge whether they are true or not. Ex-Marine planned a terror attack, left a letter slamming Trump on Jerusalem. He was arrested. He was going to attack Pier 39 in San Francisco. And the interesting thing is there's no denial that this was terror related. In fact, the complaint that was filed, the criminal information that was filed by the FBI agent under oath, said that this was terror, 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 all the way through the complaint. You can find that online. And MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute, shows all these things that are being posted on all these websites by ISIS and other jihadi groups about attacks that are supposed to come on countries see the one in the upper left-hand corner? Soon on your holidays. Look at this one. I think this is Riverside Church in New York. We meet at Christmas in New York soon. Picture of the Colosseum in Rome. Then there's pictures of the barriers that they erect everywhere to prevent these from going. It comes out at the same time that in the UK, this report came out. Islamophobia is still a challenge for all of us. And it talks about the fact, it's some of the most convoluted reasoning I've ever seen. I'll maybe try to cover it later. But it talks about anti-Semitism, and the problem with anti-Semitism, it's worse than it's not as bad as Islamophobia, because anti-Semitism, Jews want to be in Israel, and so that makes anti-Semitism okay. I think that's what that paragraph said. It's very difficult for us not to be anti-Semitic because the Jews want Israel. And it comes in the face of, I'm going to turn the sound down on this. These shouts that are taking place, Kabar, Kabar, Yayud, these are these shouts which are directed towards Jews. The one on the left is taking place in Times Square, New York, within the last week or two. The one on the right is in Malmo, Sweden. And there were a whole bunch of these that were cited by Robert Spencer at Jihad Watch in an article, and almost every one of them have been taken down by YouTube. Videos of this. This is Erdogan talking about Israel being a state of terror. This is a speech that he gave about a week ago in central Turkey to this, and he was attacking Trump. But he also said there's a person who used to be the publisher of today's Zaman newspaper, which was shut down, and Erdogan arrested people in the purge that he did a year ago. And this is what Erdogan said. Those who think that they own Jerusalem better know that tomorrow they won't even be able to hide behind trees. In a reference to a widely circulated prophecy of hunting down and killing every Jew. And that comes from a hadith, not from the Quran. And this is what it says. The last sentence there. The last hour would not come unless the Muslims will fight against the Jews, and the Muslims would kill them until the Jews would hide themselves behind a stone or a tree, and a stone or a tree which would say, Muslim or the servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him. And the tree, Garkad, would not say, for it is a tree of the Jews. In other words, there's one tree that the Jews could hide behind. So they say that's why the Jews have been planting these kind of trees all over Israel. Now, I want to remind you of what Ben Rhodes said on Twitter. And the reason I want to say this is, and I promise, 3 minutes, I'm pretty much done. The Jewish Defense League of Canada had their Twitter account suspended. Why? They put up a post that said Pamela Geller and Mio Yiannopoulos were going to be speaking at this college campus. And their Twitter account was suspended. Ben Rhodes can say, I hope Ryan, McConnell, and Pence die. And you cannot tell me that that is not what this little creep meant. And if he said that's not what he meant, he's a liar. Because that's what the left always does, is they lie more than anything else. The thing that Pamela Geller put up was that there was some concern that the train derailment in Washington, just outside of Seattle, Tacoma, the other day, the first time they ran on that route, was a terror event. Now, I think I mentioned this last summer when it came out. The Al-Qaeda report, or the Al-Qaeda magazine, Inspire, had a whole issue devoted to what? Train derail operations. Included in that report was a map of U.S. railroad lines by ownership, and included detailed instructions how to make a little tool to put on a track to derail a train. Now, listen, I don't know what happened in Washington, but there was somebody on Facebook that sent me a post that they had posted Pamela Geller's article about this might have been a terror operation. And the post was immediately taken down by Facebook and said Snopes.com and factcheck.org have said that this is fake news. Even though this is clearly what they published. Now, I say this because Wired Magazine has this article out this week called You Are a Number. And imagine a future where your life is measured by a number, 3 digits that dictate your place in society. That future is now. Look at what it says on the right. America invented the 3-digit credit score. Now companies in China are taking the idea to the extreme, using big data to track and rank what you do, your purchases, your pastimes, your mistakes. Soon the government will join in. Enter the age of social credit. And it has a long article there. And I only say this because I do think there's a time of persecution coming. I just do. And you're going to be ranked. China is pushing this like crazy. And with 5G technology, they're going to track who your friends are, what they post. And if you don't unfriend people that post things like, gee, this might be a terror event that killed citizens of the United States on their way to work one morning, but you can be an assistant to the president and hope other political leaders die in a Twitter thing and you're okay. Well, I'm concerned, okay? And look, this is, I think we're past the tipping point. I don't think you should stop doing what you want to do. I don't think you should be afraid. It's the way it is. But, speak the truth, right? Sometimes you have to do things that seem rather impossible. Somebody sent me a sermon, I just listened to a little short clip of it about guys talking about 1 Samuel 17, story of David and Goliath. And David picked up 5 stones. And I think if you look at the story more closely, David was pretty bold because he didn't figure that he needed 5 stones for Goliath. He knew that Goliath had 4 brothers. So he was figuring 1 for each of them, right? I'll take him down. And that's how we have the book of the Bible's full of truth. So what should we be afraid of? We shouldn't. We should be bold. Should support each other in that. We should not be afraid to speak the truth. it will come at some cost. People may not like it. They didn't exactly like Jesus' message. So, and we're told over and over that we should expect this. So, bear down and stand up for the truth. So we'll talk more about some of the, maybe look at a year in review next week. Let's pray. Father, thanks so much. Thanks for the gift of your Son and his full, complete, finished work on the cross that none of us deserved, but that you offer us as the payment for our sin because of your grace and mercy. Bless us this week. Help us stand for the truth. Be bold and encouraged, knowing that our work for the Lord is not in vain. In Jesus' name, amen.